Hi guys, so we will be talking about HTTP codes. In this session, the objectives of this video is or are as follows. We should be able to define HTTP codes, differentiate HTTP codes from each other, and determine when to use a particular HTTP code and how to handle them. So for this one, HTTP codes is the codes that are used to communicate what the server um, is able to do or what the server wants to communicate whenever you do a request. So there are specific codes that we must adhere to so that we are able to, of course, provide a better feedback to the users. It is coming or either the request comes from a browser which adheres to these HTTP codes to process those responses from the server, or if you are another web application server developer that tries to access an API, we must adhere to this HTTP code convention um, for feedback. So first is the HTTP codes um, 200. Of course, there is an HTTP code 100 series. You can check it out from the Mozilla uh, documentations. Um, so what we will be showing here is some of the more popular HTTP codes that we might encounter um, in this series. So for the 200 series, these are HTTP codes that will return by the server when the response to the request is successful. So one of them is 200 OK. So given an HTTP method like get, it should return the body that is requested. If it's head, it should represent the headers that will be included if you do a get request. And if you have a put or post HTTP method used, which we will be talking about later on, the result of the request has been transmitted in the message body. Now, when to use this is every time your server returns a successful response. Now, if you want to have a more nuanced successful response, you can use 201. If given a request, it has succeeded in creating a new data or new resource. So typically used on post method, which typically creates a new data point in your request. For HTTP codes 300 series, this will mean that you need an additional action to be able to fulfill the request. So if you get a 301, it means moved permanently. So that means you need to request the proper request to the new URL that is provided. Next is the 400 series. This means that you need to rectify whatever you have requested so that it can have a successful response. So that means the responsibility of correcting the error is on the client side or the one requesting. So for 400, that means it's a bad request. You might have a malformed request syntax or invalid request and so on and so forth. So you need to change your request parameters. 401 means unauthorized. That means you need to authenticate first before requesting again. 403 is forbidden. That means even if you are authenticated, you are still not authorized to use or do the request. So you need to stop doing it in essence. Um, Next is 404 not found. The server cannot find the requested resource. So this is a really popular thing because you'll always see 404 um, whenever you try to access a URL, but it's not there. Servers may also send this response instead of 403 forbidden to hide the existence of a particular resource to an unauthorized client. So it is sort of dependent on the business requirements if you will return 404 or 403. Now, 405 method not allowed means that a particular request method is not supported by that particular server. So let's say for example, an API may not allow calling delete to remove a particular resource. 407 proxy authentication required. Um, if you remember our n-tiered architecture, this is only used by the proxy servers if um, you need authentication as well. 408 request timeout, it means that the server can disconnect the connection to the client if the request timeout is reached. 409 conflict means that a particular request conflicts with the status of the server or the data that is within it. Typically, we can use this when you are requesting an edit to a data source but will conflict something inside it. 410 is gone, typically used when you want to say that a particular resource is deleted, or that means you have saved the instance as deleted. But it is best to use 404 instead of 410. Um, sorry. The HTTP specifications also intends that this status code to be used for limited time promotional services. So that means if a particular promotional service is not available anymore, it should return 410 gone. 411 length required means that the server will reject the request because a content length header is not defined and you need to define it. Usually useful to know if a particular request has a particular size that you need, and that means if the size is larger than what is allowable by the server, then you can return a 413 payload too large. 414 is URI too long. So that means if the URI that is being sent is very long and it cannot be parsed, then you can return this HTTP code. 415 unsupported media type is also an error if let's say you are accepting a file for upload, but you only allow JPEG image types, but it uploaded a PNG image type. So you can return 415 so that the user can rectify the request. 429 means too many requests. So that means you can return this error to tell the client to stop sending uh, requests until given amount of time. So this allows us to rate limit the requests and not abuse the API call. Now, lastly is the HTTP code 500 series. This will return if the server encountered an error internally, either the server or the network of the server. So 500 internal server error means that the server encountered an error, it crashed, and it doesn't know how to handle it. So if you see this in your logs, you need to fix it. For 501 not implemented means that compared to 405, if a method is expected to be implemented but not implemented, you can, or not yet implemented, you can return this 501 error. Now, 502 bad gateway is returned by the load balancer or proxy servers, which means that the network where the server resides to has a problem. 503 service unavailable is used by server admins to say that the current server is either under maintenance or or is overloaded and its service unavailable. It is also automatically sent if there's a DDoS attack usually. And 504 gateway timeout is also returned by the load balancer or proxy servers um, when similar with request timeout, but the server is the one, or the network of the server is the one um, that cannot handle the request because of because it became idle, or it cannot properly process the request in a timely manner. Oh, and so that ends the video for the HTTP codes.